Hey, this is Steve Bloom, and you are listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hello and welcome to episode 143 of the Cinema Geeks. I am one of your Cinema Geeks Optimus Solo, and joining me today for this episode is HardCandiMandi.
Hey.
And MovieRevolt Dan. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. 3 Cinema Geeks for you today as we're giving you back-to-back movie reviews. I know that doesn't happen very often, but we are back-to-back new movie reviews. That's right. We all got to the theater last time to see Spider-Man. We all made our way back to the theater to see War for the Planet of the Apes. So today we're going to be talking about War for the Planet of the Apes, and maybe a few of the other Planet of the Apes films, I guess, along the way might get referenced. So before we get into that, as always, we love to get your feedback on this, on our new movie reviews, as well as our other series that we have going on. So if you want to stay in contact with us or give us feedback, we'll do that right here at the beginning of the show. You can do that on the website, www.geekcastradio.com. Just find any of our episode posts. You can comment there, leave us feedback, and we'll interact with you there. Or if you have questions or comments you want to do via social media, you can do that. The best way would be to do it on Twitter. The show handle is @CinemaGeekcast. My Twitter is @Optimus Solo. Amanda, what's yours?
@HardCandiMandi. Eyes, no eyes.
And Dan, what's your Twitter?
I'm at MovieRevolt.
So we would just love for you guys to interact with us through Twitter or on the website, and we can definitely get some discussions going. But today the discussion is War for the Planet of the Apes. So Amanda, let's start with you. What was your history as far as Planet of the Apes goes going into this? Which films had you seen? Which ones hadn't you seen? And what was your interest, or how much did you like the ones that you've seen?
As far as the originals go, I think I've seen the first 2, and then what's the one we watched the other day, like 5?
4.
4. And then, of course, I saw the Marky Mark one, and I've seen all of the newer renditions as well.
So just a couple of the old ones that you haven't seen?
Yeah.
And how did you like the originals that you saw? How did you like Marky Mark's version, and how did you like the 2 in this series that you've seen so far?
I think that the original versions were cool. It was a cool concept. Seeing it when I was younger, before these newer versions came out, it was a cool, weird, scary concept. And I did dig the Marky Mark one. I did. I don't care what anybody says. I liked it. I had fun with it. And when, the direction completely changed and they got a little bit, more back to the original storyline almost, with these new versions and almost like a prequel to all that, I would say. It took it to a very, very emotional level, and I think that in all 3 of these now, that's the one thing that stood out for me, was like the emotion was real, no matter if it was coming from humans or apes or any of that.
Did you have a preference as far as which one you liked better between Rise and Dawn?
I don't know. They're all really super freaking heartbreaking, so...
Okay. Dan, what was your background as far as Planet of the Apes goes before we get into actual talk on War for the Planet of the Apes?
Of the originals, I've only seen the first one, the original Planet of the Apes, which I enjoyed a great deal. It's definitely a movie that's product of its time. Very much a 60s sci-fi film, but it's kind of impressive what they were able to do with the practical effects and performances some of those actors were able to give through rubber masks that didn't really move all that well. And I also saw the Tim Burton version. I remember very little of that. I do remember that the special effects, in the sense of like the suits and the makeup, were pretty impressive, and I remember pretty much nothing else except for the ending being one of the most confusing of all times. And then with this most recent franchise, I remember when the first one was coming out, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and thinking, like, why are we doing this? This is stupid. Why we don't need this. And then ended up being a really good movie. And I loved Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which is why War of the Planet of the Apes was my most anticipated movie of the year, because I really adored that movie so much. It was such a huge step up from Rise, which I enjoyed, but I thought it kind of brought it to another level. So that was my
nice
preparation going into this.
Yeah, I had been kind of exposed to Planet of the Apes as a youngster. I'd never really watched any of the films. I'd probably seen like bits and pieces because I remember my cousins were somewhat into them, and they had like the the action figures or some type of toys of Planet of the Apes. And I always just didn't take it serious because I always thought it just looked so silly as far as the ape costumes and stuff like that. But I had never actually like watched one and paid attention to it until for some reason I got the Blu-ray set of the original 5 films. This is before Rise or Dawn ever came about. And I sat down and watched all of them. And there's some good ones and there's some bad ones in that first 5. There's like hits and misses along the way. But I just really fell in love with kind of the stuff that I didn't know was part of this franchise. Like I just thought it was a sci-fi movie with, people in these ape costumes, etc. But there's a lot of like thematic things that you can get into. There's a lot of statements that they're trying to make and things that they're trying to get across that I think are very interesting, and I think they do it in a very interesting way with the apes, etc. So I thought that it was intriguing, and it really kind of piqued my interest when this new series was going to be released. So I also decided to go back and of course watch the Marky Mark version just to be a completist and see all of them. I actively disliked the Mark Wahlberg version for a lot of reasons, including the ending, and so not a big fan of that. But when this one came about, it just seemed like it was a weird idea that they're going to be doing Planet of the Apes again. I was kind of maybe like in your camp a little bit, Dan, where it's like, what's the purpose of this, or why are we doing this? But I guess it fits the mold of some of those things that become relevant to do again based on where technology has taken us and where, the art of visual effects and things like that. Like some of this stuff is nice to see done again in a way that you never thought you were going to be able to see it. So that's kind of what really kind of got me interested for this new series. And I obviously loved Rise and Dawn both quite a bit. They were both very high on my list as far as films for that year. And I think this was in my top 2 or 3 films as far as most anticipated this year. I think it was this and Star Wars and one other film. So I was definitely very intrigued for this one. We actually, kind of a side story before we get into our actual War for the Planet of the Apes talk, I did try to take advantage of the fact that they were playing a triple feature of Rise, Dawn, and concluding with War for the Planet of the Apes on the Wednesday before it released. The reason that we tried to take advantage of that is because I was going to be on another podcast that was recording Friday night, and I didn't know how else I was going to be able to see the movies before that. So we decided to make a whole day of it and see 3 films in the theater. And as usual, when we go to the theater, it seems like we find interesting stories like the ceiling caving in like the one time, etc. But so I'm sitting there. Amanda was going to get there a little bit late, so she was going to get there probably a half hour, maybe an hour into the first movie, and then we were going to watch the rest of that and the final 2 films together. So I'm sitting in the theater. There's actually quite a few people that were going to take this 3-movie tour, because we probably had somewhere between, I don't know, 20, 30 people in the theater at least. They were giving out posters and lanyards and all kinds of stuff. And sitting in the theater, and the first one was supposed to start at 4 o'clock. Somebody walks in at 3:59 and says, the first movie is not going to play. So I don't know what happened. I don't know how movies work, I guess, but there's something wasn't loading or wasn't going to be ready in time. There was a big storm the night before or that morning, and they lost power in the morning. And apparently it takes like 2 to 3 hours to get these things ready, and it, for some reason, wasn't going to be ready in time. So not that doesn't defeat the whole purpose of watching all 3 of them back to back. So they're like, you can go see another movie if you'd like that's playing at 4, and then come see the other 2, and we'll give you some movie passes for, some free movies and whatnot. So it was 4 o'clock, and the second movie was going to be starting at 6:30. So my options were to see any other film that was starting at 4 that was going to be done, within 2.5 hours. So I went out, and I'm like, okay, I'll go see another movie, and then it'll be, an extra 2017 film that I wasn't planning on seeing. These were my 3 choices that would have gotten done somewhat in time to see the second and third film. I could see The House with Will Ferrell, or I could see Cars 3 or Despicable Me 3. So I was,
man,
yeah.
How did you choose?
I was thinking, maybe The Big Sick or The Beguiled or something that we hadn't seen might be playing, and we can get that out of the way. But no, those are my choices. And so instead, the ultimate decision was to sit in the theater with Amanda and just stare at a black screen until 6:30. That's what we went with. So because otherwise she would have been in the theater by herself for a while I was finishing the other movie, and it just seemed weird. So I just joined her, and we watched an hour of black screen, and then got ready for the final two movies, which did play. They did play. It was interesting going right from one into the other, though. I think that definitely helped my enjoyment level, because we went basically right from Dawn to War. And what was interesting is in between the second and third film, they didn't turn the lights on in the theater at all. Like, they left all the lights down, and like there was still like almost a hum, like an audio hum. It seemed like they hadn't shut the sound off or something. And so we just got to sit there in like complete dark, listening to like this hum for like 10 to 15 minutes, waiting for the third movie, which probably bugged a lot of people, but for me, it like even amped my anticipation more up. I don't know how that's possible, but it did. So we did get to see War, directly right after the second film, and spent 6 hours in the theater instead of 8 or 9, I think, is how it turned out. Amanda, what was that experience like? We did end up, for the record, with 5 free movie passes, so that helps, I guess. But what did you think of that marathon?
Man, it was a daunting task, especially after working all day and then having to go spend another work day like at the theater, basically. So I just ate a ton of shit and enjoyed the movies that we did get to see.
The funny thing is, it's like they didn't know they were doing this. So you're about to show a marathon, so you know that people are going to be in the theater for 8 to 9 hours, right? They're going to be seeing 3 movies back to back to back over the course of dinner, because it starts at 4 and it ends at like midnight. So people are probably going to need to eat at some point, right? They didn't even have most of their, like, Amanda was going to try to order some hot dogs because she loves movie theater hot dogs.
Don't judge me.
And they were still frozen. Like, they didn't have them prepared enough so that they could do anything with them. So, like, not only did we not get to see our first movie, but then we couldn't eat any of the food that we typically would have eaten because they didn't have it prepared. Which is like,
And then they stick you in what feels like you're on a train to Auschwitz.
Jeez, I can't believe you said that.
I did. I feel like we're on a train going to some death camp in the Holocaust. It was not fun.
I think you guys need better theaters.
Yeah, we do need better theaters, that's for sure. I mean, we don't necessarily dislike our theaters, but it seems like, I don't know, this is like the multiple times that they've dropped the ball on something like this, and it's just kind of like, this is at least the third movie that we went to see that we weren't allowed to see because of something screwing up technologically. But anyways, let's get back to War for the Planet of the Apes. It is directed by Matt Reeves, written by Mark Baumbach and Matt Reeves. Obviously starring Andy Serkis, Steve Zahn, this time the main human here is Woody Harrelson, so we've had a different one in each film. And it's getting all kinds of good reviews as far as Rotten Tomatoes and critical response. I don't know what it's at currently, but last time I checked it was somewhere in the 80s or 90s as far as Rotten Tomatoes. I think it was like at a 94, 95, somewhere in that range. And it did, I believe, beat Spider-Man in its opening weekend. I think it was Spider-Man's second weekend and War's first, and I think it won that weekend. So it's doing fairly well. I don't know if it's quite holding up to what they were hoping for based on the last couple films, but doing fairly well. So let's get your guys' initial take on War for the Planet of the Apes, starting with Amanda. What did you think of this third chapter of this trilogy so far?
I think that it definitely played out the story really well from what we got from beginning to the end, and it did have closure, but still like this open-ended hope. So you got closure for the story that we're in, but it opens it up to then kind of birth these original movies that we did get. So there was a lot of little connective tissue pieces here and there for all the films, and I think that it was strung together really nicely. I didn't have an issue with the pacing. Even seeing it that late in the theater where normally that's past my bedtime, I did manage to stay awake the entire time. I don't know, I think that the characters are really compelling here as usual, the apes especially, and getting to see, all this range of emotion, like I mentioned earlier, was totally awesome, especially how real the apes look, and then to see that real emotion played out is really awesome.
Do you think it lived up to the hype?
I would say so.
Okay. And just for reference sake, if any of you haven't heard any of our movie reviews on the podcast before, we will keep all the spoilers towards the end, and we'll tell you when those are coming. So we will be spoiler free for this first section of the review. Dan, what was your initial take on War for the Planet of the Apes, and do you think it lived up to the hype?
It is. It's quite a challenge when, like I said, it's my most anticipated movie of the year. So it's like, if it's not the best movie of the year, does that mean it doesn't live up to the hype? And I definitely don't necessarily think that's the case. But yeah, I thought it was quite the film, and I think this is quite the impressive trilogy of movies that we have here. And I don't know, it's so odd that these movies exist in a way. Like, I'm surprised that like a movie studio would allow these movies to happen. You know, it's not that long ago when we couldn't have a Transformers movie with just Transformers because we have to throw humans in it, and we're getting an Apes movie where apes are those, and it's just odd that you're rooting against humanity, but it works in that way. But I was impressed with it on a number of different levels. On a technology standpoint, like, it seems like it's been said ad nauseum at this point, but it's worth saying that, like, what they're doing and how far we've come in the world of CGI is just it's incredible. It's not just that they look lifelike, but the emotion too is just insane that they can display, from Caesar to Maurice, and like it's like, I think Amanda said, you just forget that you're not looking at real apes, and I think that's the key to making this all work. That, I mean, if this doesn't win Best Special Effects Oscar, it's that award shouldn't exist anymore. And I think Caesar ends up being one of the best cinematic characters in this for this decade by far. Just the journey he goes as a character from the first film to this. And I thought it did a good job at subverting expectations in a way from what it isn't and what you think it might actually be, in based upon the title and the marketing and just the way some characters are set up. I don't necessarily think it was the best of the trilogy, but I think I did enjoy Dawn a little bit more. But I also appreciated how Koba and his presence was still kind of felt throughout this film, and how I was not expecting that, but you should certainly see how much of the effects of the last two movies really have kind of led to this. So
I think you bring up an interesting point with the fact that you do have these two sides, I guess, from all intents and purposes. You have like the human side, and then you have the ape side, and what they each represent, and you've kind of had that, especially in the final two films of this trilogy. And you bring up an interesting point about who you're rooting for, who you're not rooting for, and I've heard a couple people make statements that they find it too hard to root against the human race and to root for the apes, or I guess there's a couple different camps out there as far as if they're willing to root against humans or if they're siding with the apes, et cetera, et cetera. Amanda, how did you kind of reconcile that? Like, were you rooting for the apes the whole time, or are you like, to hell with these jerk humans, or were you hoping that humans would find a way to survive this plague/war, etc.?
I would say I definitely felt for the apes more, but I think that's part of the setup where Caesar is the main character, especially early on, and you get to feel his pain. So you get to feel that anger towards the people that he does feel anger towards, for how he was affected, but you also, are touched by his, I want to say it, his humanity, when he cares about other species as well. So you know that he's not just completely against humans. He knows that there's good and bad of both. So I think that's kind of where I was sitting too. There's good and there's bad of both. So it kind of just depended on what I was getting from the characters. Like, there's one specific character in War where he's let go by Caesar, and he chooses not to kill him, and you think that some redeeming thing is going to happen with this guy, but you see later on, like, he's just a soldier, so he's just going to still be a soldier even though kindness was shown to him. So there's definitely showcasing of bad and good of both apes and humans, and I want to say I was rooting more for the apes in War, and I would say I tried to back the humans in Dawn, but just how they reacted and acted, I didn't like.
I think you bring up a good point that I think one of the best parts about this whole trilogy for me is how much it delves into the world of the gray, that things aren't black and white, that this trilogy lives in the gray area. It lives in the idea that there are no, black and white. There is no definite, it's not like one thing is total good, one thing is total bad. So it really, I think, does a great job of kind of dancing in that gray area and really playing with the idea that everybody has good and bad qualities and every group has good and bad qualities. But I think what this trilogy has done, it has brought us humans, that there are humans to root for within, at least in the first two films. Like, you have James Franco's character and you have his dad. I guess those would be the two that stick out in the first film. And then, of course, you have Jason Clarke and his son and a few of the other people in the second one that stand out that you're somewhat still rooting for. Dan, is there anybody like that in the third film, or does it become a little bit more where the apes and the humans are at much more of a contrast without that, without the good guy, I guess, amongst the humans that you can root for, or do we have one of those characters that kind of plays that role in this one?
I would say for the second and third film, that's probably maybe the one area that they maybe struggle with the most is the human characters in a way. Because even the second film had the more heroic heroes, but they weren't necessarily, the main point. They felt like afterthoughts, which I think allowed for a better movie because you had allowed to focus on the drama between all the apes. And when in this, I think what we see is necessarily with I don't know, like in a way, I don't know, like you talk about the gray area. I think that's a good point because I don't necessarily think we're rooting. Yes, you're rooting for them, but I don't think necessarily that's what drives the movie in a way. It's like you're just experiencing kind of the what's occurring in a way. You're kind of just you are a voyeur to the downfall, and it's not necessarily that you're wishing for it. You're seeing the inevitable, and how kind of humans try to grasp for straws as much as they can to stop it from happening. I mean, with the third film, there's I think 2, 3 maybe speaking roles of humans,
right,
that have more than a handful of lines, and I think that's okay. I think that and I can't say why without really spoiling it, but I think ultimately what it shows is more of the facade of that character. Says I think more about what the film's going for than necessarily the way that it sets it up originally, because you think it's setting it up for this ultimate ape first man showdown, but it goes a different direction, and I think it's what that direction is purposeful, and I think it knows what it's doing, and it's what I really appreciated about it.
I think too, you do bring up a couple good points here, that this one is titled War for the Planet of the Apes, and I know you can take the word war and find different, meanings and definitions out of that. But for how it seemed like it was marketed as this was going to be this big all-out actual battle or more of like an actual war piece, really there's more battling and war-like elements in Dawn than there is in War. Like in Dawn, that's when we get, two sides showing, with the showdown at the wall. We have, the one of the greatest scenes in the whole trilogy with the tank, as it's approaching the wall, and Copa's, you get the 360 angle and whatnot. So it definitely seems like we get more of the actual warlike elements in Dawn, which is very interesting. Like you said, how they kind of went against expectations for War. Amanda, were you disappointed that you didn't get more battle and more war, and it was more kind of, I guess, on the ground and kind of more of the psychological aspects of it versus all out, tanks and guns and blazing?
It was more like a concentration camp of the apes instead of war for the Planet of the Apes. I didn't really think of it at the time, but now that you guys are bringing it up, that it's kind of confusing that we got more war in Dawn than we did in actual War for the Planet of the Apes. I think it's maybe more for some of the big moments that happened toward the end, but it's still a confusing title and how it's worded there.
Dan, you mentioned too that Caesar might be one of the greatest characters that we've gotten this decade, and I think a lot of people too have been applauding Andy Serkis and what he's been able to do with that character. Now I know some people like to write off voice acting or motion capture as not real acting, or for some reason not on the level of a live action, in body actor. But with the landscape that we have, where even if you take people that aren't in motion capture, half the time these days people are acting against a green screen or acting against some type of CGI After Effect, etc. Where are you in the camp of, is Andy Serkis, is he someone we should be talking about for an acting award, for an Oscar, for any type of, whoever's willing to cross that boundary, or is that just like a pipe dream that's never going to happen, or is someday the old white men that control some of these award shows going to be able to get to the now?
They'll be taken over by apes, and that's. I think it's a hard question to answer because we don't know what's being adjusted or changed or edited through the power of technology. I know Matt Reeves in interviews has said that like they actually have a version of this film where you could watch it and it's just the actors performing it without the CGI, and it's the same exact movie and with all the same beats, and they go at great lengths to match all of the movements and facial expressions of the actors and their voices. So it's just kind of a layering upon layering that they do in order to portray that. And I think, so I think there's certainly reason that they should be recognized. I think it's important to look at that and figure it out in some way. And I think maybe if you were an Oscar voter and able to see that footage of the actual performance, I think that would, be a good way to educate yourself to see if they should be qualifying for these awards. But I know Oscar voters have difficulty just watching the movies in general, so giving them two versions of the same movie might be too much. But yeah, so I think probably they should, but I think it's a little more complicated than I kind of understand why they aren't, but I think there has to be a recognition of like where technology is going and figuring it out in some way, because these type of performances are only going to probably increase as the years go on and we get 18 more Avatar sequels and everything like that.
It's almost as if they should come up with some other separate award, maybe even like a non, non on screen. Like you could put voice acting, you could put motion capture, you could put whatever else comes down the pike later on that all these people might be able to fit into. I don't know.
I think even like something like Scarlett Johansson and her, who couldn't qualify because she didn't appear on screen, which really doesn't make sense, because if you're able to give a performance just through voice acting, doesn't that mean something? But then it's like, do you count animation in that too? And I'm like, yeah, maybe you should. If someone gives a great, like if Robin Williams from Aladdin was given Best Supporting Actor nomination, would anyone think he didn't deserve it for that performance? I would say no. So I think that's something people need to think about.
And I think, regardless of where you fall on the Andy Serkis point, I think you do make a good point, though. The arc that Caesar goes through, and I think it is, we have to tie Andy Serkis to that, but what he's able to do with Caesar in these three films, because Caesar is at three completely different points. He's portraying Caesar in three completely different ways. The emotion, the experience, the naivety, the youth versus the seasoned older version that we get in this film. The fact that he's been able to pull off what he has with Caesar, and the fact that the people that are doing the writing or the directing have gotten what they have out of this character. I mean, I cannot think of anybody that we've gotten to see in such different stages of their life and in such different emotional stages as well, to be pulled off like this I think it's just remarkable. I mean, I know you kind of already said that it's one of the best characters, so I'm just kind of echoing that. Amanda, are you impressed with what all the different things that we've got to see through Caesar's lens throughout these three films, from a little baby to what we see in this one?
Definitely. I think that we see this huge arc really with him, and that's anybody. I mean, you can hope that you're dynamic enough in your life to go from this childlike baby version that we saw all the way to the saltier version as an adult and see him grow and come into his own and see why he holds the beliefs that he does. So I think they did a great job in showing us that, showing us his story, making us vest in him as a character. And I think Andy Serkis was amazing. And I think that everything that he does, because he puts his whole body into it too. And so, I mean, there's so much more emphasis on body language and showing emotion the right way, and it's I would say it's harder. I would think that they would deserve more props for motion capture like that.
And just real quick, I want to get your take because you have a different, a unique perspective when it comes to a part of what we get in these films, because obviously not all of the apes are able to speak, and they do communicate through different types of signing and different elements like that. And as someone who studied sign language and went to school for it, how did you like or dislike, or did it bother you, or do you think they did a good job in how they're showing the communication through the apes that can't speak?
I think some of it really is super close to real sign, and some of it also is largely what the apes are able to do with, their movements. So it's definitely a primitive form of gesturing mixed in with some actual sign language. So I think it's a great way to show how they communicate and how their communication advances.
All right. I was just, because you're the only, you can match it up with actual sign language, obviously, more than someone that doesn't have that eye for that. So I was curious if they were using stuff that was similar to what you had learned through school.
Some of it's a lot more vague, it's just more gesturing, but they use the same gestures over and over. So it's consistent. Definitely, it's something that they've identified as an actual sign, like a use. It might not be, what we as Americans in this region use, but some of it is.
Interesting. Another thing that I'd like to get into before we get into other elements of the film you like and maybe some themes and stuff like that, we've been talking a little bit about characters, so obviously we should briefly touch on the human character that is involved here, which is Woody Harrelson as the main one. We'll save any discussion on the other two maybe for spoilers, but as far as Woody Harrelson and his depiction of the Colonel, a lot of people loving it, and a lot of people, this is the part that they didn't necessarily care for. Dan, where do you sit as far as how did Woody Harrelson stack up in this film, and how does he compare to what we got in the other films with James Franco and Jason Clarke?
I think Woody Harrelson's American treasure. So I kind of go back to how I enjoyed it. It's would subvert expectations. A lot of that centers on his character. I thought he did a great job. Like, he did a lot with what he was given. He had a really difficult sequence where he was basically given kind of the exposition of the entire film, and he thought a lesser actor would not have been able to make that scene work nearly as effective. I do think it's probably the most problematic scene in the movie, but still he makes it work much more than it would have with a lesser actor. I think he certainly is able to construct that character with a limited amount of time and screen time. So I thought he was effective. I thought he would have a bigger presence in the movie going in. I thought he would certainly you would see more of him, but I was okay that we didn't, if that makes sense. So.
All right. Amanda, what did you think?
I thought that he was a bit of a driving force in this. I don't think that he was as big as I thought he was going to be. But he also reminded me a lot of Sam Jackson's character in Kong. Like, he was like a borderline zealot. Like, some of his rationale wasn't rational. So I couldn't really get behind his motivations whatsoever. But, I mean, I guess crazy shit happens in a post-apocalyptic ape world, and you lose your damn mind or something. I don't know.
I'll give you guys a bunch of stuff that you can jump off any part of this. But I think another thing that I really loved about this film was I thought it was very subtle with a lot of different things, and I just kept thinking over and over again about the subtlety in different elements. As far as I thought the score was subtle but effective. I thought that they found some very underplayed and subtle ways to add just enough I don't really want to call it comedic moments, but just enough levity, I guess, to make you not as depressed as you could have been during this film, with the amount of emotional actions and decisions and things that are happening to people that are going on. I mean, it could really take you down a notch and just have you wallowing in a pool of your own tears. But I think they had just enough levity, just enough comedy. I think the score is subtle, and I just thought a lot of the things they did were just enough. Like, they never would seem to go overboard. Like, even there's not like an overboard as far as cheesy dialogue. I didn't think it doesn't go and create some artificial drama where it didn't need to exist for me. So I just really liked how much they kind of found a balance between different film aspects or different aspects that they're playing with. I don't know if you guys felt that or not, or Dan, if you want to bounce off any of those types of ideas and what your take was on the film.
To go off the score, yeah, I thought the score was especially moving and effective. I don't think, when I think back to the other two films, the scores didn't really resonate all that much, but for this, it certainly did click, and especially I think in the more somber moment, it was certainly effective. And when you had some of those emotional beats, and as Amanda mentioned, where you basically have a ape concentration camp, and I think that certainly when you have some of the big moments within that, the score is a big key in making those work. So I would second your enjoyment of that.
Amanda, what did you think about the score, or any of the, I guess, somewhat comedic or lighter moments that they tried to put in there to make it so you could survive this thing?
I don't really know about the score, unless it's some big awesome soundtrack with a bunch of songs that I enjoyed. Like, I'm probably not gonna have anything good to say about it. If it's something super annoying and obvious, then yeah, I'll say some bad stuff about it. But in between there, I'm not great at discerning what was awesome and what wasn't, and anything subtle. But the comedic moments, I liked Zoo Ape.
Yeah.
He was cool to me. At first I thought he was a little too cheesy, but I think that he was used well. I think his actions and seeing his reactions to what was going on was also pretty cool and funny at the same time sometimes.
One of the hosts on the other podcast that will remain nameless that I talked about War for the Planet of the Apes on compared the Zoo Ape to Jar Jar Binks and absolutely hated him. Do you think that's fair, that he was somewhat Jar Jar Binks-like, or do you think he didn't even come close to that?
He was way more useful and capable and than Jar Jar Binks ever could be. I think Jar Jar Binks only just stumbled around and accidentally killed some clone soldiers or whatever. But this guy actually put in work, and even though he was scared, he did things to help and turned out to be capable.
Dan, what did you think about their idea to include this zoo ape or an ape that wasn't necessarily from this original group, another ape out there that represents maybe different possibilities for the future or whatever? What did you think, and how it was executed?
I think it's one of those little pieces that they put throughout this one to kind of show where it's heading, to give you an idea of that, leading into what would be eventually the world from the first movie that was created. And I feel like this entire franchise has done a really good job of that, of kind of laying the seeds of showing how we'll eventually get to the point where it all started from, the first movie where they're in the background on the news, the ship that brought Charlton Heston to the ape world is launched, and to this, I think what that shows is obviously that the apes that we've been following are not the only apes that have certainly been affected in the way that they have. So I thought it was useful in that end. I can understand why some of the comedy or the way that ape was portrayed wouldn't work for some people. At times it did seem a little totally inconsistent with some of the moments, especially in the final sequences. It's it seemed like out of place a little bit, but I would by no means equate it to Jar Jar Binks, because I didn't hate that character by any means. And I thought there was actually at least somewhat of a story with that character, and and I found humor in that character from just the Steve Zahn's performance to just the awkwardness of him as a character. I mean, some of the humor may have seemed a little bit on the nose, like using the binoculars the wrong way or something like that. But I also think in a movie that is so deeply depressing as this, in certain sometimes you do need a little bit of a light to make you not completely lose your mind. So I felt a little.
He had some depressing ass moments though too, like when you're getting some of his backstory in that like snowy little like enclosure that they were in when they first are like sitting with him. You find out that he's had some sadness in his life too. Like the funny guy in this movie still was touched by the awful stuff that was going on here.
I think this movie definitely also had a lot to offer different people. Like, I think if you are a fan of drama, it has that in loads and emotional beats. If you're a fan of visual effects, there's a lot to look at and like from that standpoint. There's action. I think there's a fantasy / sci-fi element to enjoy, and I think it tackles a bunch of themes. I'm curious on your guys' take. Do you feel, because I was impressed with the number of different themes, and this has been true for just about every film in this franchise, maybe the Mark Wahlberg notwithstanding, but especially in many of those original 5 films and in these 3, the number of themes, the number of social commentary items that they're able to do, and especially just in this one, the variety of things that they're able to tackle without it ever seeming like it gets bogged down or convoluted. I feel like they achieve a pretty good balance. Like, if you just take this film, you have religious themes, you have family playing a big part, different familial relationships, you have male-female relationships going on, you have this idea of unity, sacrifice, survival, tolerance obviously plays a huge part of the entire franchise. Dan, what did you think of some of the different thematic elements that they're able to kind of touch on, and do you think that they achieved a balance, or do you think that some of it gets kind of lost in the mix?
I don't think necessarily gets lost. I feel like depending on who you are and the way you approach the film, certain ones will stand out. I think for me, the story, the allegory that certainly permeated the most for me was the Promised Land story, in a way, like how that this has become, where you have this leader attempting to overcome his own obstacles to lead his people out of bondage into this, the promised land, and
right.
it follows those beats pretty well, that you would expect, all the way up to the very end, and within that, obviously, it's saying a lot, but also, like I said, regarding, I think it says a lot about the hubris of man, and to me, it all fits. It's kind of this ultimate, like, this jigsaw puzzle that all kind of puts it together, and after the end you take a step back and, oh hey, you have this movie and everything fits really well. I never felt like anything was necessarily forced. Something maybe more overt than others, but I think that's okay. I think everything really was well earned. So yeah.
And a couple other ones that I forgot to mention that obviously play a huge part in this one would be vengeance, forgiveness, and those types of things. Amanda, was there a theme that stood out that kind of, or something you connected to in the story that worked more for you, or did you feel like you were getting bombarded with a lot of different aspects and couldn't make heads or tails of any of it?
I really didn't discern one element from another. I think I was just kind of bombarded with emotion, really. So I was too blinded by what they were all feeling to even really think about like a bigger picture there, or a hidden agenda or anything like that. There was some really heartbreaking stuff, especially between Caesar and his family, and his little guy, and seeing some of the stuff that you see in their little concentration camp thing is hard.
Another interesting thing that they do in this film is they find a way to, and like I said, this is always blurring the lines. It's not just about apes, it's not just about humans. So you do have a situation in this film where you have the side that is majority ape centric that does have humans on their side, as well as apes that are fighting on the human side. How do you think those two elements worked for you, Dan? And what do you think about the idea to kind of make that distinction, that you're not just having a uniform side on each side of the wall here? You have apes and humans interacting for both camps.
Yeah, and I think it was very effective right from the start, and where I thought the opening scene was going, and where the first time you see a hand from a gorilla, and it ended up a lot differently than I expected. I thought that was used well. Like I said, I liked how the events of the last film still very much have bleed into this. Koba's shadow is certainly still here and affecting, Caesar on a more personal level, and then you have the fact that you still have a lot of apes that are loyal to Koba, and I kind of like that. I wasn't sure. I was a little worried at first that it was going to be traveling similar ground that it did with the previous movie, and you'd have like a, Planet of the Apes Civil War again, or something of that nature. But I liked where it goes. I liked just the way they portrayed it, calling them donkeys, and the little things they did to identify who the good monkeys are and who the bad monkeys are, shaving like things in their fur, marking. At first I thought it was just them being cruel, and I'm realizing, oh no, it's just because to them because they're racist and all monkeys look alike to them, so they have to make sure, or they're not monkeys, they're apes. I'm sorry, that's inflammatory. So they have to, in order to identify who they are. I'm like, oh, that makes I like it. Again, you talked about subtle things, and I like little touches like that. So.
Amanda, what did you think of those characters that were kind of playing for the other side at different times, or the dichotomy between one ape in particular, or gorilla in particular, that is on the human side compared to the character you talked about before? Because we basically have two characters that are fighting on Woody Harrelson's camp. With I believe they called him the preacher, the marksman with the gun or with the crossbow, etc. You had him who, like you said, we've had moments where it seems like he has seen the error in Woody Harrelson's ways and maybe will betray him. And then you also have the gorilla character who is is part of the ape family, I guess you could say, and is he going to betray the side that he has decided to fight for because it's more powerful, or because he thinks it might be the winning side? How do you think those two characters work for you?
I don't know. I felt bad for the donkeys, but I also was kind of, like, I don't care. Like, you chose to do that. You're there for a reason. You went to them. But it's sick that they would put themselves in that position, you know what I mean? And it was sick to see how they would treat their own.
Yeah, I think that's for sure. I think it does set up some interesting things to see. Will one or will the other one eventually see the errors in their way, or make a different choice, or go down a different arc? And I think it's a very interesting way that they let it play out as far as those two characters go. Last thing before we get into final thoughts and then into some spoiler talk, I have heard some comments on social media, especially on Twitter, film Twitter, about the amount of references to possible, some other films that it might be paying homage to, or it might be ripping off, according to some people. Dan, were you aware of some of the things that were being used throughout the film, or were you so wrapped up in the story that you didn't really think about that until after the fact? I know a lot of people are saying things like Apocalypse Now, and a few other films that they're seeing in this film, The Ten Commandments, possibly The Great Escape, The Bridge Over the River Kwai, Ben-Hur, different things that I've heard people throw out there. Do you think it was too much of those being touched on here and there, or do you think it fit within the story and it's not that distracting?
I guess, I don't know. I wasn't thinking of the movies. I was thinking of the actual, I know if people know this, but Ben-Hur is based on a book. So that's kind of what I was taking. Like, honestly, when I was watching it, and other movie references outside of the franchise itself didn't even occur to me. I was more thinking of the real life ramifications, the real life kind of reflections it was making, whether it being biblical or historical based. That to me is more the connection that I felt was going. Maybe there were specific scenes that they were homaging, but I personally didn't really pick up on it per se. But when I was watching, I felt to me, the message, especially considering the subject matter, was more geared towards kind of its reflection on real life and society more so than filmmaking. So that's why I kind of took that out of it.
All right, Amanda, let's start with you. What are your final thoughts on War for the Planet of the Apes before we get into spoilers, and what kind of grade would you give this one?
So I don't think I was as wowed by it as I was the others. I was definitely touched and moved and was pulled through some crazy stuff, but I think that Woody Harrelson being such like a zealot kind of took me out of it. I didn't really dig that part of it, so I'm gonna give it like a 7.
Okay, fair enough. Dan, what about you? Any final thoughts from you, and what kind of grade would you give War for the Planet of the Apes?
Man, the tough questions. It's interesting. Like, it's hard. It feels unfair, but I was like looking and comparing this to the past film of Dawn. I keep messing up the name. I think what that made me have that this one didn't for me. I think there were certain just like ultimate highs, like you mentioned the battle sequences. Maybe that was what I was maybe looking for a little bit more, because I thought the action within the was okay. It had its moments, but it wasn't as impactful, and I think that was partially because of what it was going for. But I think it's a supremely well crafted film. It's interesting because it just kind of, I don't know. It's not necessarily like specific moments that really have stuck with me as much as some of the other films, where it's more just the overall kind of mood and journey that I went on that I felt was the most effective and why I enjoyed it the most. Like, which is not usually the way I tend to enjoy movies. I tend to when I get out of films often, or just how certain sequences and scenes are put together. But it was different with this. I thought it was one of the better crafted like action franchise, whatever you want to call it, that we've seen. Like I said, I still can't believe this movie's being made, because it so much goes against the grain when it comes to what you expect for blockbuster or summer blockbuster. This, by all means, could be an art film. If it, it could be, like I could legitimately see some of the scripting being legitimate, nominated for some way. For me, it's tough. I still want to see it again. I feel like I'm still kind of going back and forth over my final grade, but I'll rest on an 8 right now, with a high 8, if that makes any sense. With a chance of going up. I just feel like I need to see it again to really come to a final conclusion. But it's like I said, it's my most anticipated movie of the year, and I walked away happy. So it's ultimately the most important thing.
Yeah, I walked away very happy as well. I think you do make some good points. I think there is one thing that it's missing, that Dawn especially had, and even Rise a little bit. Those iconic moments, or those iconic scenes, like the first time you hear Caesar speak, or the first time you see Caesar or the other apes on horseback, or like we talked about, that tank sequence where it's that 360 shot of them attacking the wall. There's just some very memorable moments that you got in those first two films, and I don't know if anything stood out to me as far as this one goes as a moment like that. So I don't know if it necessarily had that. I think it had just as much emotional punch, or probably more than the other films. I think that's something that the first and the third film maybe honed in on a little bit more than the second one. Not saying that's good or bad, but I was definitely pleased. My immediate reaction was that this is on par with something like the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Like, as far as action or franchise related trilogies, like, this is up there. Like, I don't think they missed on any of these films. I think they're all above average, good films. So I wonder, part of me wonders if this, obviously visually it wouldn't have been able to happen, in a different time period, but let's say we took like all of the superhero films out of the equation and say that we haven't had any of the Marvel Cinematic Universe or things like that. Would people be reacting different to this Planet of the Apes trilogy? Because to me, this could have been like this generation's, Jurassic Park, or this generation's Star Wars, or something that just came out of nowhere and just like hit you with stuff that you've never seen before and had some type of like crazy effect. And I don't know if it if its effect is lessened by the sheer number of blockbusters we get and, you know, the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or not that that has anything necessarily to do with Planet of the Apes, but just what we're used to seeing when we go to the theater. Because to me, this is something that's like deserves more credit. Like the trilogy deserves more credit for what it's been able to do, both from a visual standpoint and from a story standpoint, with what, like you said, something that has, there's 3 humans in this movie. There's literally 3 humans as far as speaking roles in this film. Name another blockbuster that has been able to pull that off. So I don't know. I think like it deserves more attention and more credit than it even is getting. But I do appreciate the fact that, you know, people have been high on this franchise and this trilogy overall. I just wonder if it wasn't for all the other films that we get on a nonstop basis, if maybe this would even be elevated to a different level amongst people that haven't seen this type of thing before on the big screen.
I think what hurts it is that it's not as entertaining driven. Like it's not necessarily a movie like Jurassic Park. I love, and I think it doesn't necessarily have the the deep thematic elements of this, but it has it's like it is that thrill ride where I don't necessarily think these movies have that. They're very much more story driven, and then the last 20 minutes you get some really kick-ass action sequences. So I think that's maybe why some people might get a little, people think summer action, they probably think more bombastic and things of that nature. And when they get this, it's not, your second film was basically Shakespeare with apes. And I think for some people, that's not what they're looking for summer blockbusters. That may be why some in like the more general audience don't, kind of cheer for these as you would some of the other movies. I don't know. That's just my guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. I did forget to give a score, so I'm with you guys, especially you, Dan. I am like hovering right there between an 8 and a 9. I'm either a real low 9 or a real high 8, somewhere in that field. I do want to see it again and kind of even have more time to reflect on it, but I was this is near the top of my list, if not the top of my list for the year so far, so I enjoyed this one quite a bit. We're going to take a very quick break, and when we come back, we're going to do a small amount of some spoiler talk, because I think it is necessary with this film and the trajectory that this franchise is on, so we'll be right back after the break.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Hey guys, it's Optimus Solo and
HardCandiMandi.
And we just wanted to let you guys know about another podcast out there that we both think you would all enjoy.
It's one of both of our favorite shows to listen to, and it's none other than the True Bromance Podcast.
True Bromance is a movie podcast hosted by longtime friends Hyro and Barry, and if you like to smile, laugh, and just be genuinely entertained while listening to movie talk, then this is definitely the right show for you.
Each week, the guys break down a recently released movie, and not only do they tie in the movie that week to the beers that they are drinking during the show,
but they also tie it in to a real fun top and bottom 5 list associated with that movie.
It's a blast hearing both sides of these lists, and it definitely makes them unique amongst all other movie review podcasts.
So we definitely want to recommend all of you guys to go check out their show. Just search out the True Bromance Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and all other podcast platforms. And if you listen via iTunes, do us a favor and leave them a 5-star review. And don't forget to let them know that the Cinema Geeks sent you.
On the Simplistic Reviews podcast, we talk movies. We talk TV. We talk.
Hello, Julie, what the heck are you doing?
Trying to make our spots sound more exciting by adding explosions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could have got the point across with sound effects, not the real thing. Car.
Download this show on iTunes or at simplisticreviews.blogspot.com.
I'm sure your insurance company will cover that.
No, they won't.
No, they probably won't.
Now back to the show. Do you see how your patience paid off?
All right, thanks for sticking with us. We are back to talk spoilers for War for the Planet of the Apes. Amanda, we will start with you. Obviously, you mentioned a couple different times in your conversation on the film that there is a lot of emotional beats. There's a lot of depressing, sad moments that are going on here. Did any of them hit you more unexpected or hit you with a little more impact than you thought or than others?
Like everything revolving around Caesar and his youngest. What was the youngest baby's name?
Cornelius.
Yeah. It everything about that was so heartbreaking. When first he sees his wife and eldest son Blue Eyes killed, then he wants to know where the little one is, and just when he sees the little one finally, like, and the emotion surrounding that, and then when he sees them again and he has to basically give him up to make sure that he's safe while he goes and enacts his revenge or whatever he needs to. So the emotion of giving up his kid was also super hard. And then when he sees him again at the concentration camp, and the noises the little guy was making was so awful and heartbreaking. And then all the emotion when they finally get to where they're trying to go, and it's everything basically that they wanted. And Caesar's final moments, like everything surrounding that was super, super sad too.
Sound like you're getting a little verklempt there.
I feel bad for the little baby monkey, okay?
A lot of people, well, maybe not a lot of people, but some of the people that I've been talking to on that podcast that will remain nameless had a big problem with Caesar and the vengeance angle. And I wanted to get your take on this, Dan, because they were saying that they couldn't get behind it, they couldn't understand it, they couldn't buy the fact that you would be willing to abandon one of your only remaining child to go after the colonel like Caesar does. You have a child, so you have more insight than we do on this one. But what did you think?
Well, that was an unexpected question.
But what did you think about that? You see that your wife and your child has just been killed. In your house. In front of you, basically. And obviously the emotions and the anger and the vengeance and the all the sadness that's going to be going through your head. Do you think it's believable that Caesar then kind of goes out on this quest or this journey with his band of brothers, because you basically have 4 or 5 characters that are following him on this trek to kind of get back at Woody Harrelson's character? Do you find that that's believable, or do you think that most characters would have stayed with the remaining child and gone a different path?
See, I think it's more than just revenge, though. I think that's a piece of it, but I think a part of his mission too is understanding that they're going for him. Like, he is what's bringing this, the humans. He's the one who's causing them to death, basically. And I think his overall first thought is, if he goes after them, the target will be on him, and that will allow for his family, his other apes, his son, to get to that promised land that they're very much hoping to get to. So I don't necessarily think it was only vengeance that was driving him. Certainly that was his ultimate goal. But I think there was more to it, in the sense of him also feeling like this would be the only way for them to actually achieve that goal of the promised land, was to bring the fight towards the soldiers, to get their guns on him, so they'll stop trying to achieve or kill all the apes. I think what we often see is that Caesar makes bad choices in a way, and not necessarily bad, but ignorant choices, because he's still trying to kind of figure this all out. And I think that why it worked for me is because what you see is like his entire journey is about is he better than humans? I think what he's struggling with is that maybe isn't. Is it that animal instinct taking over where it did for Koba, where you just need that vengeance? And I bought that, because it's not necessarily just about, it's more than just the vengeance in a way. It's about who he is as a character, as an ape, how he's evolved or not evolved. And I think it's all those things that he's struggling with, and also on top of that, the hope that he'll be able to, lead to a better future for the other apes as well. So I never had an issue with that.
I mean, the same question to you. Did you buy the reason for Caesar to leave, as far as drawing them away from the apes, getting them to safety? And what did you think about the parallels that they're making Caesar into a very dancing on the edge of being almost a Koba-like character in this film at a point?
I never got the vibe that he was turning out to be like Koba, or was so specifically acting in a way that was Koba-like. I think that he was motivated by a little bit more vengeance than normal here, but that's totally to be expected. So maybe some of his decisions were a little clouded, but I think it makes sense when he knew that they were coming for him. So if he was going to stay with them, they were going to come again to him where he was. So he was just going to go to them, head it off, and take the fight to them. So that made sense. But hard decision nevertheless.
Yeah, for sure. Dan, the same question that I asked kind of Amanda at the beginning, there's a lot of death in this film. There's a lot of death. And some of it may work more than others. Were there times where you thought it was more effective? Were there times where it was more shocking? We definitely see, like Amanda mentioned, Caesar's family, most of his family killed. We have some of the people that follow Caesar on this trek to hunt down the colonel that don't make it through this. We see humans that die during this film, and obviously the big one at the end of the film that we see as well. How do you think this film handled the sheer amount of people that don't survive it?
I think some of the big deaths that didn't work, like I thought like could have been better handled, were the death of Caesar's son and wife. I think I got what they were kind of going for in that sequence. It's supposed to be kind of a mystery, but it felt, I don't know, that moment I felt it could have been bigger, more impactful than it was in a way, because it happens off screen. It seems kind of confusing in the moment, and then like I don't know, it especially since both of those characters were such a huge element in the second film, that like it felt like their deaths, even though they're a driving force in the film, the actual occurrence of it happening didn't I don't know, it seemed almost like an afterthought in a way. Like it seemed kind of like cloudy. I thought one of the death of obviously Woody Harrelson's character, that one I kind of struggle with, because I part of me, like the poetry of that moment is great. Like how you ultimately see this man who did everything he did, and then now he is where he's at. You know, he's now kind of became what he feared. But I struggle with, like, I understand why Caesar didn't kill him, but I also wonder, like, would Caesar let him kill himself? Like, would he have stopped that from happening, and or just stood there and watched it occur? Is that the same or similar to killing him in a way? And I don't know. That's one, like, I can kind of see why it isn't, because it's, you know, he's making that choice himself. It's kind of an inevitability based upon what's occurring to him, but it seemed like for that moment, for that journey to come to its full conclusion, Caesar would have done a little bit more. It felt like he was, I don't know, almost finding like a cop out in a way, where, like, yeah, he's not killing him, but in that element, obviously, right. And just in how he's allowing him to kill himself, I just felt like that it seemed to contradict where they wanted to take the character.
I can see that too. I'm wrestling with the way that Woody Harrelson's character comes to his conclusion as well. Amanda, what did you think about the whole idea that there's this disease out there same disease, but it's morphing into a different form now, and creating humans, kind of de-evolving them in a way, and obviously the way that we find Woody Harrelson, who has been up to this point a very bombastic, very, you know, demonstrative figure, now just being a complete alcoholic mess and killing himself.
I didn't buy how fast it happened. I think that if it was something where they were, you know, offspring was coming around with this degenerative form or defect, then yeah, I could believe that. But happening like within a matter of hours from contact, I didn't believe that. And it was a little anticlimactic almost to see him in that state instead of having him fulfilled in the way you think that he's going to. But I think as far as Caesar just watching him or letting him kill himself or whatever, I still feel like, or I feel like he still thought that justice needed to be served, and this guy still had some atoning to do. He killed his own freaking son, he's killing his own men, all the stuff that he did to the apes. I think Caesar still wanted that closure, wanted that justice, but he didn't need it to be done by his own hand then at that point.
Yeah, man, that's definitely a sequence, like I said, I'm still wrestling with. I can kind of see both angles, as it being a cop-out and as it being something that was
more of acceptance.
Right. I think the death, obviously, that works the best for me is the ultimate death of Caesar at the end. Not to mention the fact that if he had survived everything that he's been through in the last 2 films, it might, I don't know if he's gone into superhero status at that point, because this guy had been through quite a bit. But I think the way that they handled his death was phenomenal, and very emotional. Obviously, we've come to love him as a character. We've seen him through 3 movies, from a little baby all the way through here. So a lot to kind of be invested in. But I think my favorite part about how they handled his death was the fact that there was no pomp and circumstance, that there was no, it was just Maurice, you know what I mean, as far as being right there. And I also like the fact that they made it more real than Hollywood in that scene. Instead of going the I guess more like the Spielberg route, or more the Hollywood route, where they created more drama than needed to be, they made it real, because they leave Cornelius off in the distance running around like a kid would. A kid would not know the gravity of the situation. He wouldn't think that anything bad is happening to his dad, etc. So he would be off free, enjoying the freedom, enjoying being around, and being to celebrate with the other kids, running around, being like, acting like a kid would. So I really appreciated the fact that they left that element in, as kind of like this fact that nobody really understood what was going on. Caesar is this, unhurtable, almost like an immortal figure to them. So the idea that they aren't even thinking about his safety at that point seemed more realistic to me than if they would have tried to lead some type of forced dramatic moment. How did you think, Dan, they handled Caesar's death at the end?
I think it makes sense. I mentioned it's the Promised Land story, and with every Promised Land story, the person taking the Promised Land doesn't make it into the Promised Land. Right. He got to see it, he got to view it from afar, but I felt, I don't know, I felt like if he didn't die, it would be a disservice to the series, which I don't know, that's kind of a morbid thing to say, but it was interesting though, like what killed him in a way, it was just, arrow to the side, which, going back to the biblical allegory, I'm sure that is not amiss, as he's certainly a Christ-like figure. But I thought that did work well, and I just love the relationship between him and Maurice. And Maurice is another great character, a great presence throughout the entire movie. And Caesar looks amazing with the special effects, but something about the movement of Maurice and just the ring, I don't know. I could just watch a movie of him just like in a zoo hanging out. I guess I don't know. It was just like his the effects that go into his creation is just crazy.
I think the other thing that I wanted to get your guys' take on before we wrap up is the idea of all the different references that they're making and the connections that they're making to the original film. Obviously, we have a lot of very careful naming sequences going on with Caesar, with Cornelius, with Nova, the other female human character that we haven't spoke of yet, and kind of getting your guys' take on that character in general. But a lot of little things, Dan, like you were talking about, that are the seeds that are placed to get us to the point where we're heading into the original set of films. But before I get to Dan, Amanda, what was your take on Nova as a character? And obviously, for those that don't know, Nova is coming straight from one of the characters in the original series, as is Cornelius and Caesar. Those are all names that have been repeated now, and not by accident. So what did you feel like as far as the girl in this film?
I think she was an emotional tool. She was something to move the emotion in certain directions at certain times. I think she did good. I don't think that, I don't know. It's not like her character would have, been the make or break aspect, but I think that she was super serviceable.
Dan, what about your take on Nova and your take on some of these other ties into the original series?
I thought her character was interesting. The introduction to her character was, what kind of struck me too was like the reaction to, I don't know if it was her father, but whoever was taking care of her, and just the lack of impact that had. And I don't know if that was supposed to be kind of providing evidence into what this new strain of the virus is doing to humans, like if it's kind of removing some sort of emotion, or if it's dulling that element of because that very much is an animal reaction in a way. I mean, obviously certain animals have been known to show remorse and things of that nature, but I don't know if that was kind of the point of that, showing that she's losing that idea of family based upon the new development of this disease. But I thought her character worked. I thought, you could probably make this movie and have that character and not much changes per se.
Mm-hmm.
But I think certainly it's a situation where it's not necessarily the character, it's what the character represents that's important. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like the way that they kind of tied some of that stuff in. I like that she gives another element of a human being on the ape side, and that she almost wants to be recognized as an ape. And I thought it led to some cool relationship aspects between her and Maurice, and her and I'm forgetting his name, but the other gorilla that's in the band that's journeying together. I thought that led to some pretty cool moments there. And I do think it's interesting how they are somewhat tying into some of the original series, which gives me to the last question for you guys. What do you think as far as the future of this franchise? Is this where it should end? We've had a great trilogy. For all intents and purposes, all three movies worked very well. And should we leave it at this, or do you want to see further connections to? There's talk of sequels, a fourth film, or possible other films that may connect back to the original franchise and the original 5 films. Do we need more, or should they leave it be? Dan, what do you think?
Well, I didn't want to see the first one, so maybe I'm not the best person to ask. Maybe my advice would be wrong. I really hope it ends, and just because I feel like it reminds me of, I felt like the Bourne Ultimatum. It was like that's it. You don't need more. I wanted to see more, and then when we got more, it was like, yeah, we should have ended with the last movie. And with this, I just feel without Caesar there, where could you go with it? Do you end up just making a straight remake of the first Planet of the Apes? And maybe there's something to say with that, but I think you end up losing a lot, because a lot of what made the Planet of Apes so effective was not knowing what was actually happening to the end in a way. So I don't know. This team, I'm impressed with what they're doing, but if they feel like Matt Reeves and his writers and stuff feel like they have room for a fourth film, go with it. But if it were to end and we not get another Apes movie, I would also be completely okay with that. So.
Fair enough. Amanda, agree or disagree with what Dan was saying?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like one more after this wouldn't be the same. We don't have Caesar. What would it really be? And we've already got the movies where it's going. Do we need another one to shoo us along even further, or should there be some room, some gap here?
Rogue One moment where it butts up right against the other film.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see some people wanting more, but I am fine with it being done. I think it's a great trilogy on its own, and I think they could leave well enough alone. But maybe they got something, a trick up their sleeve that we don't know about. But definitely let us know if you agree or disagree with our take on War for the Planet of the Apes. Overall positive reviews from all three of us. You can let us know, like we said in the intro, by going to the website geekcastradio.com or interacting with us on Twitter. We already gave those Twitter handles out, but definitely would be interested to see if you guys agree or disagree with War for the Planet of the Apes, and if you want to see more, or if it should end here. That would be the question that we would pose for this podcast on the website. Should we have more Planet of the Apes films, or is this where it should end? So please answer those questions on the website, and we'll react to that when we see those responses. So that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with some more, getting back into our finishing off a couple different spotlights that we have, and announcing maybe some ways that you can interact with the show and determine the future of at least one series that we'll be doing here coming up. And also, like we've been announcing in all the other posts, there is a contest going on. So if you want to win a 6-pack of video game movies that we've been discussing in one of our other spotlights, just leave us a review on iTunes. Go to iTunes, leave us a review. Any review that is left there automatically gets entered into a contest to win that 6-pack of DVD/Blu-rays that are all about video game films. So that's it for this week. Tune in next week for another chance to listen to the Cinema Geeks.